My name is Paris Hyatt, and this is The Power of the Unconscious Brain. So, starting off with this quote here from our book, at this moment, just like every moment of your life, networks in your brain are buzzing with activity. Billions of electrical signals are racing along cells, triggering chemical impulses at trillions of connections between neurons. You remain blissfully unaware of all their activity, but your life is shaped and colored by what's happening under the hood. The reason why I thought that quote was so important was because it summed up exactly what happens in our brain. It is constantly running, constantly moving, it never stops. There's so many different transmissions through your neurons, different connectivity, electrical signals, but we never notice it. And what the unconscious brain controls is everything. It's physical movements, it's everything from breathing to talking to remembering to blink, but also how we make decisions, driving, what we choose to do with our lives. It stores memories, creates dreams. It allows you to shut off when you sleep, different things. And that kind of goes into my next bullet point here, voluntary versus involuntary activation in different parts of the brain for different processes. Now, this is a source that I listed in my reference page, but this article talks about the difference between voluntary and involuntary actions. And voluntary is when you are conscious that you are choosing to do these things, right? I am constantly choosing to do this presentation right now, and I'm very aware of that. While I do this presentation, though, I am breathing, I'm blinking, I'm talking, I'm um, remembering to swallow, I am moving my hand as I talk, which you can't see, but these are all things that my body is doing actively, involuntarily, or even unconsciously as I am consciously performing this act of the presentation. So that's a really good example of what I mean. Reflecting on the topic through my research. So, one thing I thought was really interesting was again another concept from our textbook, proprioception. So that's the capacity to know the state of your muscles, right? The state what's currently going on with them. Now, this is a subconscious matter, but it is essentially your brain gathering information from your joint about your joint angles from the receptors in your muscles and your tendons and your joints. And this allows your brain to make the proper judgment of whether or not you are ready for quick movement and to move you the most efficient way possible in whatever position you're in. And this is because you are using your senses combined with your neural receptors sending information to your brain to allow for this information to be processed and to perform this movement. And it all happens within split seconds. The coffee example here that I've listed is another example that was discussed in our textbook. So, David Eagleman discussed how, let's say, you're getting coffee with somebody, and all of the different movements, mechanisms, different small acts that are being performed while you are just sitting there having coffee, right? You go to reach for your coffee cup and take a drink of your coffee, right? So you are using your vision, your peripheral senses to kind of gauge your environment, right? And then you reach for your coffee cup. Your brain is sending signals through your muscles in your hand, again, adequately taking note of what's going on to get to the coffee cup, right? And then it takes muscle, it takes movement, it takes coordination, it takes thinking to reach for the coffee cup and bring it to your mouth and gauge the adequate amount to tilt it to get the liquid into your mouth. This is all very, and now he explained it better, of course, but this is all a very systematic, organized procedure that your body is coordinating every single movement and sending every single piece of information to coordinate each movement to be able to do this. But this is an extremely small task while you are still talking and engaging in conversation over coffee. The unconscious brain and the world around us. So, the unconscious brain works with our senses and the physical world to create our personal perception of reality. This is something that was talked about in a TED Talk that we watched by Leonard Mlodinow. I hope I said that right. How your unconscious mind rules your behavior. And this video basically summed up how everybody's reality is different because of their unconscious brain, right? That's where we hold all of our memories. And we use all of our memories and experiences combined with our senses and our physical being to create our perception of what reality is, and that's why everybody's perception is different. Another concept that I found was really interesting was the concept of modeling. This was also discussed in a TED Talk, The Neuroscience of Empathy, and this is essentially describing how we experience empathy. It is your brain making you experience whatever you are watching as if you experienced it yourself to be able to feel that empathy. That is how we feel empathy. So your brain is taking the initiative to, let's say you're watching somebody stub their toe, that's what was in the video, and you sit there, you see the picture. Now you feel the reaction, but before you feel your reaction in that split second, your brain acts as if you experienced it. So you feel those emotions. And that is why you experience empathy, because you feel the made up or unconscious pain of that experience you're watching. What does this effect have on your cognition? The interesting thing about the unconscious brain is that if it is working correctly, you will not be cognitively aware of it at all. You will have no cognition of what is going on. That is why we don't have to think about breathing. That's why we don't have to think about walking, which is why I thought the example of proprioception was really interesting, because we are not aware of where our joint is at the time when we're walking, but our subconscious brain is. Now, how does this compare to my field of interest? Understanding the subconscious of your brain and the fact that everybody has different realities and ways of thinking and different makeups allows us to understand each other better and learn how to communicate more properly, that adequately gets to each other and gets the point across better, and therefore we connect better because we're reaching each other on a deeper level. And essentially, that goes into getting people to participate in sustainable practices, because the number one problem with green economy, or improving the environment, or implementing more sustainable practices in any way, whether it's your personal life or business, it's the participation. You have to get people to want to participate, and they don't want to participate unless they are motivated and they care. And you have to find a way to reach them in that way. So, understanding how people think and what they experience, you can more adequately get them and reach them and get them to care about it if you understand them better. My personal interest in the unconscious brain is something that's considered as autopilot. So, this is also something that was touched on in our textbook. And here's a quote that Dr. Eagleman provided. It's the ability to burn programs into the structure of the brain is one of its most powerful tricks. So, essentially, when we learn a new skill, it is burned, physically hardwired, right, into our brain from the neural pathways, right, from the transmissions. They're creating channels, essentially, that hardwire this habit into our brain to remember. And the more you practice this habit, the further below consciousness it sinks, until eventually it is sunk underneath your consciousness into the subconscious of your brain. And that is what we consider to be autopilot. That's why sometimes when we're driving, we don't even realize that we made that turn, or we stopped at that stop sign, or we noticed that the light was green, but we didn't actually notice. It's because that stuff has sunk into our autopilot. Something really interesting that I found out about this topic particularly is the fact that the human brain only uses the same amount of energy as a 60-watt light bulb. And this is really interesting because we have spent millions, billions of dollars trying to create robots that replicate the same functions that the human brain do. And we have racked up, again, millions of dollars in electrical bills trying to fuel these robots to be able to perform the same functions, and they still can't. But the human brain only uses the energy of a 60-watt light bulb. So the most important things that I've learned about this topic is that, like I referenced earlier, when we learn new skills, they're physically written and ingrained into our brain through these neural pathways, and they sink below the consciousness. And that's why we're proficient enough with them, and we don't have to try so hard. Same thing with walking and breathing. We learned how to do those things at one point. Also, the fact that our consciousness, our intuition, our like awareness isn't the only participant in who we are and how we make decisions. There's so many subconscious things from a collective of the life that we've lived that's stored in our brains that we don't even realize. It contributes to who we are and how we act. And lastly, that every person's reality is different because of those things, because everybody has had different experiences, and also their brain chemistry and the way things flow and work is completely different. So, sorry, that was my low battery. So everybody has a different perception of reality. What others should know about this topic. This allows us to better understand ourselves and others. It enables us to practice more empathy because we can understand where people are coming from a better space, and also that everybody is truly really different because we all store a different subconscious. And then we can create more effective and meaningful connections that way. It's also a great way to be aware of how much it actually takes for us to do small tasks and appreciate. Just like with the proprioception in our textbook, there was an example of a gentleman who lost the ability to, for his brain to experience proprioception to properly map out what his muscles are doing. And so he has to be cognitive of every single movement all the time if he wants to walk. Having that mobility without having to do all that work is a blessing. And lastly, that the human brain is so complex and vast, and we spend so much time and energy trying to replicate it in robots. Is that really worth our time? Do we really think we can do that? And how does the unconscious brain impact in my field? I mentioned this earlier, but this allows me to reach people more efficiently. I can understand how to connect better with them. Also, how to gain people's participation in sustainability and change the way they see things because I understand how they see things better and find ways for them to make changes in their life that make sense to them. And lastly, to be more mindful and empathetic of others, that we're all working together for society as a whole to allow everybody to think as a bigger picture for one another, because that is the goal of sustainability and greener practices, is to get everybody to think more as a unit rather than individually. And these are my sources. Thank you so much.